Several years ago, while working as a tennis pro in the Seattle area, I coached a particularly interesting young player that I will call Sam. To me, Sam was an unusually motivated 9-year-old, but Sam's dad was constantly lamenting what he perceived to be Sam's lack of motivation. Murray's classic 1938 definition of motivation is this: the intrinsic need to accomplish something difficult, to master, manipulate, or organize physical objects, human beings, or ideas. To do this as rapidly and as independently as possible, to overcome obstacles and attain a high standard, to excel oneself. Sam loved to play tennis. I mean, he really loved to play tennis. And he did appear to have an intrinsic need to master the game of tennis and to excel as a tennis player. To be honest, I'm not quite sure where Sam's motivation came from, but I don't think it had much to do with his dad. It may just have been what Jean Piaget called functional assimilation, his term for the natural tendency that children have to master tasks for the sheer enjoyment of mastering tasks. Piaget believed that all children are born intrinsically motivated to adapt to their environment. Proof of this functional assimilation can be seen at an early age. Before age 2, toddlers are visibly pleased when they master challenges, but don't really care about the approval of others. This is due in part to the lack of self-awareness. After age 2, children are more self-aware, and as such, they seek recognition from those around them, especially their primary attachment figures, when they master new tasks. And when 2-year-olds fail, they expect disapproval from others. Around age 3, children take pride, not just joy, in their accomplishments, and experience shame, not just disappointment or frustration, when they fail. And this is made possible by the reality that 3-year-olds are much more self-aware than infants and toddlers. Also around age 3, children tend to become somewhat competitive. They are pleased with their efforts and are proud of themselves when they complete a task, but they are often especially happy if they finish first. And by age 4 or 5, children start to show a more complete understanding of competition, evidenced by the fact that losers slow down or even stop working when a winner has been declared. Beyond childhood, the old-fashioned view of motivation is that it is a trait that some people possess and others don't. More recently, there's been a greater emphasis on the idea that motivation is more situational, or an interaction between some set of traits and a particular set of circumstances. I'm not sure how Sam did in school, or how much effort he put into his homework, but at least in a tennis situation, nobody could question Sam's motivation, except Sam's dad. The reason for this discrepancy can be explained by considering the goal orientations identified by Gill and Dieter in 1988. They found that some athletes who have a win orientation are motivated primarily by the desire to beat others or appear to be superior to their opponents or peers. But Gill and Dieter found that other athletes are more motivated by improving their own performance or achieving a new personal best. They called this a goal orientation. And finally, they found that a third group of athletes, those motivated by their competitiveness orientation, are driven by the sheer enjoyment of competition and the desire to compete. Sam loved practice, but he really loved tennis matches. Sam loved competing against other players. He loved it so much he didn't want points to end. So if his opponents hit the ball long, he would often hit it back without calling the shot out. There was nothing wrong with his eyes. I can assure you Sam's dad had them checked. And he understood the rules of tennis and understood that, except at the highest levels, tennis is officiated by the players. Sam was a tennis scholar. When he wasn't playing tennis, he was watching tennis. When he wasn't watching tennis, he was reading tennis magazines. He wrote poems about tennis for school assignments. When he was asleep, he was probably dreaming about hitting topspin forehands. Sam's dad's interpretation was that Sam just wasn't motivated. But my perception was this: Sam just wasn't motivated in the way that Sam's dad wanted him to be motivated. To use Gill and Dieter's terminology, Sam had an overwhelmingly strong competitiveness orientation. He usually ended up winning his matches, and he seemed to like to win, but his love of competing overwhelmed his motivation to win. His desire to hit more tennis balls trumped his will to outscore his opponents. He didn't want points to end, and he really didn't want his matches to end, so he just kind of boycotted calling balls long. Sam's dad hated this, but as his coach, I loved it because I was focusing much more on his long-term development than his match scores. While the other kids were trying not to mess up in front of the few people who were watching, Sam was totally invested in playing tennis. To use the vocabulary of Atkinson and McClellan, two psychologists who originated need achievement theory in the 1960s, this is the difference between the motive to approach success and the motive to avoid failure. Sam was totally focused on playing tennis well and didn't really care about avoiding failure. So much so that he wouldn't even call the balls long. He just wanted to play and hit better shots, more accurately, and with more topspin. Other kids were more concerned with avoiding failure. Their focus was divided between making shots and not missing shots. And some kids seemed to be more focused on what they didn't want to do than what they wanted to do. One symptom of this motive to avoid failure that we see in youth sport is what I call the youth sport whiplash syndrome, where after missing a shot or making a shot, kids will immediately turn to their parents or coach to gauge their reaction, looking for approval or trying to assess how angry their parent or coach appears. Now, from a sport performance standpoint, a predominating motive to avoid failure is a huge problem. When tennis players focus on not hitting a serve long, for instance, their focus, the picture in their mind's eye, if you will, is on the area beyond the service box. And this increases the chance the tennis player will hit the ball exactly where they don't want to hit the ball. We call this ironic processing. It's the same thing that happens when golfers tell themselves, don't hit it into the water hazard, don't hit it into the water hazard. Whatever you do, don't hit it into the water. What do? They hit it into the water. So Sam's approach to competition, that is, seeking success rather than seeking to avoid failure, is a good one, and one that his dad should have been cultivating. Sam's joy of competition, his love for playing tennis, and his desire to hit bigger and better shots was tremendous for his development. And over the course of a couple years, Sam's dad finally came around and recognized the benefit of Sam's unusually wonderful approach to playing tennis. And despite losing a few matches due to his reluctance to call balls out, Sam continued to improve as a tennis player and found great success as a junior. And to avoid giving away his identity, that is where I will end Sam's story. But the key point from Sam's story is that despite what his dad thought, Sam did not lack motivation. It was just that Sam's motivation was different than the motivation that Sam's dad wanted to see. Sam's dad wanted to see Sam focus on winning rather than improving his skill or enjoying the competition. But Sam's approach is one that should be cultivated and nurtured in young athletes. Young athletes will need an intrinsic love of competing and the desire to improve if they're going to have any chance of reaching their potential as tennis players or baseball players or soccer players or swimmers. That is because it usually takes over 10,000 hours of intentional practice to achieve expertise in any human endeavor. That is 10 years worth of 20-hour weeks. To put the kind of work in that is required to approach greatness, an athlete needs to find some enjoyment in the process, at least if they are going to stay psychologically healthy while pursuing greatness. Everyone has the desire to win. But what often separates great athletes from their peers is that great athletes are willing to put in the time and effort to prepare to win through 10,000 hours of intentional practice. Sam loved practice. He loved competing. Sam loved the process. But Sam's dad almost took that away from him because Sam's dad had a very narrow, albeit popular, understanding of motivation.